As far as the aquatic standards overview, every commercial pool has to have an approved means. If the pool is 300 linear feet or less, they only require one primary means of access, and that access can be a lift chair or a sloped entry. If the pool is over 300 linear feet, and there are a ton of pools that fall into this category, they require two means of access, one primary and one secondary, and we'll touch on what those are. A primary means of an entry, according to ADA, has to be a lift chair or sloped entry. Obviously, pools that have sloped entries, those typically come about when the pool is built, versus somebody adding it after the fact. There are properties out there that they could add a sloped entry after the fact and do it out of concrete, or there also are some companies that make portable sloped entries. They are very, very, very expensive, light years more expensive than the option of a lift chair. And the other thing you have to remember too, because of the strict guidelines, and I'll touch on those, and I'll preface it by saying don't get hung up on a lot of the dimensions and all of that. But you know, in general terms, you know, a 5-lane competition pool that's at a country club is pretty much a over 300 linear feet pool. And if somebody wanted to add a sloped entry after the fact, they would in effect lose one of those lanes, which I don't think any of us think that they would want to do. So again, the lift is a much more inexpensive, and a much less invasive option. If you look at the chart here, what we're simply reinforcing is it's a nice cheat sheet. Pools less than 300 linear feet, they have to have one primary sloped entry or lift. If the pool's over 300 linear feet, they have to have two. One of those two has to be a primary source, lift, or sloped entry, and then in secondary types can be either one of the two primary or transfer wall, transfer system, ADA compliant stairs. And then there are some different guidelines when we're talking about zero entry pools, wading pools, and spas, and I'll touch on those in just a few seconds. I have had some people ask, you know, what is a transfer wall, what's a transfer system? So I've obviously got some highlights here to show you what those are, and again, it just reinforces what's, you know, primary versus not. If a pool's over 300 linear feet and it does not have a sloped entry, without a doubt, the least invasive, least expensive way to go would be to put two lifts on that pool versus any of the other options that are available. And with zero entry pools, where access is restricted to just one area, again, some specific language in the mandate, only one means is needed to enter the pool: a lift, sloped entry, or a transfer system. A lot of people say, well, this mandate only has to do with pools. And the answer is no, it also has to do with spas. And spas also have to comply with the law. I will tell you, when you look in the language of the mandate and the way that it's worded, you know, I've had several people throw some questions to me, and anybody that knows me well enough knows that if I don't have an answer, I won't make one up for you just to look good. There's a lot of confusion with respect to wading pools, because a lot of people say, well, what about a baby pool? You know, the mandate says that it has to be, you know, water within a range of 18 inches of depth. Specifically on the wading pool issue, I would definitely have you contact, if you have very specific questions, contact your local ADA officer or enforcement person to look for specific language on that, because it is very vague the way that it's worded. Spas, there also are some differences pertaining to the language. Spas must use a lift or transfer wall or transfer system for each spa. If the spa is in a cluster, you can use one lift to fulfill the needs of all those general spas, or as the language states, like bodies of water. Spas, unlike pools, do not require a footrest. but a footrest is mandatory for pool applications. And again, wading pools must use a sloped entry, period. At least that's what the ADA says. Primary accessible means of entry. Again, this is just kind of reviewing what we've gone over. A primary, a lift chair such as ours can be a primary or a secondary means. A sloped entry can be a primary or secondary means. And it's amazing when you look at the detail, and again, not to get hung up on it, but if for sloped entries, it is very specific. It has to be a certain width. It has to be a certain length. It has to have handrails. It's got all of these, very, specific access. So, they've definitely, what that tells to me is when you look at the enforcement aspects of it, it's a big deal because they've gone to such great detail with the information. You got to have a landing at the top as well as the bottom, and then it's an issue of, normal wheelchairs or electric wheelchairs can't be used, but an aquatic wheelchair would certainly solve that problem. Well, I'm sure those are not inexpensive at facilities where they can be used. So, requirements for the lift and where to put it. Any questions at this point?
Yeah, what's the difference between a sloped entry and a zero entry?
Well, zero entry would be like a beach entry pool.
Yeah, well, that's a slope, isn't it?
Well, but the slope, if you look at the specific language, they will tell you that the slope has to be a 1:12 ratio, and it just has to do with the specific specs. A lot of beach entry pools are, can have very little, if any, slope to it.
But they're exempt, though, right?
They are not exempt.
I think it's
with the zero entry type of pool, the language is written that because in a lot of those pools, that zero entry could be the primary means of access into a pool. Maybe it's on a water park or something like that. So the way that the language is written, it says relative to the over 300 linear feet calculation, or not calculation, aspect of the mandate. Those pools would, it could be over 300 linear feet, but if the majority of it is zero entry, they only require one means of access, where in every other instance it would require two means, primary and a secondary.
And 1 to 12 is 1 foot drop for every 12 inches. Yep. So a zero entry wave would be even less, probably, right? Over longer, so
yep.
Safer pretty much. So they're saying just one lift then in that condition.
Yes.
But still one.
One versus two.
And stairs are the normal. You said stairs are the normal pool stairs considered, or is it one of those?
No, there are ADA compliant stairs that are of a specific,
so
length, width, handrails, etc. So it's not just a standard handrail that or step that you could, just buy. There are specific steps that are made and manufactured that are compliant based on those guidelines.
So regardless of the pool's own stairs, it still needs two. A big
Yes.
pool still needs two.
Well, some of the stairs may comply with the riser.
They
height,
could.
That kind of stuff.
They could.
And then you might have to install, two handrails that are 24 inches on center apart and that kind of stuff. You might be able to modify them.
I think in a lot of pools, if they've got some type of stairs that are there, I think at that point you might be able to, as you mentioned, modify them, and it wouldn't be like pouring a whole new
Right.
set and all of that. But even then, I think you're probably on the verge of almost being at that cost of a lift chair. So wouldn't it be easier just to put an anchor in the deck and drop a chair in and be in and out of the backyard quickly? Again, I wouldn't so much, and I did not mention, if you, for some of the late arrivals, if you didn't sign the sign-up sheet, please fill that out and just make sure that I have your email address before I leave. And I just don't want you to feel you got to take copious notes during the presentation. I'll email everybody a copy of the presentation, and then that way you've got a lot of the good sheets. So all of this information will be provided, especially when you're talking about all of this, the specific setbacks. As far as the seat location for a lift chair, there again are very specific dimensions, and you know, ideally, the lift chair cannot be located where the water level is over 48 inches unless the entire pool depth is over 48 inches, then it doesn't matter. But ideally, they want the lift to be installed in an area where it would be easier for somebody to assist somebody out of the chair while they're in the pool, and if you can touch bottom, you know, that would be helpful. But that's what they're getting at there, and obviously minimum seat location, they want it to be a specific distance from the edge of the pool when it's in the raised position. A lot of these dimensions have to do with clear deck space to allow somebody to get from a wheelchair easily into and out of the chair. You know, very specific seat height to allow for a stop at a minimum and a maximum when it's in the raised or low position. Basically a range of 16 to 19 inches. And again, on the clear deck space, minimum of 36 inches wide, that extends forward to a minimum of 48 inches, yada, yada, yada. Again, just to make for easy accessibility for wheelchairs, they want obviously the deck to be flat or slope no greater than a 1 to 48 ratio in all directions. I think on some older pools that's going to be an issue, but you know, how is somebody, you know, who knows how strict somebody would be, you know, with respect to enforcement of that. The seat has to be at least 16 inches wide, which ours is. And again, once we're done today, I definitely want to have everybody come up and just get you have a chance just to come up here and see the unit up close and personal. With respect to footrest or armrests, footrests need to be provided and move with the seat, although that is not the case for spas, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. Armrests are not a requirement, although I heard recently, I actually believe that they are in the state of California. But the key with armrests is when utilizing those with a lift chair, they have to easily be removable, and that has to do with allowing for, again, assisting in the load position when somebody is getting in or out of the chair. Our base model standard unit does not come with armrests, but we obviously have an upgrade kit available for people that want to have the armrest and some other upgraded features as well. The key as far as operation goes, in order for a lift chair to be compliant, the user has to be able to operate it unassisted. And I will tell you, I've already run into a number of instances that when the law went into the Federal Register, there were a number of companies that, or properties I should say, that went out and invested in some of the cheaper lifts that are available with the manual cranks that probably some of you have seen. Those are not ADA compliant because the person cannot operate it unassisted. So, you know, they're still going to have to invest in the newer ones that are ADA compliant. And again, again, very specific language here. The person operating it must be able to operate it only with one hand and cannot require any twisting, pinching. You can't use a force in excess of 5 pounds of pressure. Again, I just point a lot of that information because of how specific they've gotten, that I think really is going to be a testament to how strictly it'll be enforced. For a lift chair to be ADA compliant, it has to be a minimum of 300 pounds of weight rating. Ours is 350, so we're well in excess of that. And again, it has to be able to drop the seat down to a depth of 18 inches below the stationary water level. The big keys are the weight rating and to have a person be able to operate it unassisted.